Hollywood star Brad Pitt escorted off. Late-night talk show after explosive confrontation with host. Tensions flared when the famous actor stood up against what he called unfair attacks on his family life, leaving viewers shocked as security removed him from the stage. The lights dimmed in the studio of Tonight with Jimmy Colbert, and the audience's excited chatter turned to cheers as the show's theme music blasted through speakers. Camera crews moved into position as Jimmy Colbert, dressed in a sharp blue suit, bounded onto the stage with his trademark smile. "Welcome, welcome everyone," Jimmy shouted, waving to the crowd as they clapped and whistled. "We have an amazing show for you tonight. Our special guest is none other than Hollywood superstar Brad Pitt." The audience erupted with applause. What they didn't know was that behind the scenes, tension was already building. Backstage, Brad paced nervously. His assistant showed him the show's planned segment on a tablet. "They want to talk about that trash magazine story," she whispered. Brad's face darkened as he scanned the notes. "That wasn't what we agreed to," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "This was supposed to be about the new movie." When Brad finally walked onto the stage, his smile seemed forced. He waved to the audience and shook Jimmy's hand before sitting down. For a few minutes, everything seemed normal. They talked about Brad's latest film, a few funny stories from the set, and his charity work. Then Jimmy pulled out a magazine from under his desk. "So, Brad," Jimmy said with a smirk, "I think we need to talk about this story that's been making the rounds." He held up the magazine, which had a doctored photo of Brad with the headline, "Hollywood's Most Absent Dad." The audience went quiet. Brad's smile vanished. "I'd rather not discuss that," Brad said firmly. "It's a made-up story built on lies." Jimmy laughed. "Oh, come on, it's just a bit of fun. We even made you a special trophy." He reached under his desk and pulled out a small golden statue with the words, "Worst Dad," engraved on it. The audience gave an uncomfortable laugh, but Brad didn't smile. His eyes narrowed as he stared at the host. "Put that away," Brad said, his voice dangerously quiet. "My family isn't a joke for your show." Jimmy seemed surprised by Brad's serious tone but pressed on. "The magazine says you missed your kid's birthday party because you were filming. Is that true?" Brad took a deep breath. "Jimmy, I agreed to come on this show to talk about my new movie and the money we're raising for kids in need. Not to deal with fake stories about my family." "But the people want to know," Jimmy insisted, turning to the audience. "Don't we?" Some audience members cheered, but many looked uncomfortable. Brad leaned forward in his chair. "Let me be clear. My children are off limits. I protect their privacy because they didn't ask to be famous. They deserve a normal life." Jimmy waved the magazine again. "But when you're a star like you, everything's fair game, right?" "No," Brad said firmly. "It's not. And if you'd done your homework, you'd know I was at that birthday party. The whole story is a lie." The tension in the studio was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The camera operators exchanged nervous glances. In the control room, the producer was frantically signaling for Jimmy to change the subject. "Well, maybe we should talk about your dating life instead," Jimmy said with an awkward laugh. "The magazine also says—" Brad stood up suddenly. "I think we're done here." Jimmy looked shocked. "What? We still have 10 minutes left in the segment." "Not anymore," Brad said. He unclipped his microphone. "I came here as a professional to promote a movie that's helping raise money for kids in need. Instead, you ambushed me with fake stories about my family." "It's just entertainment," Jimmy protested, his face reddening. "The audience loves this stuff." Brad turned to the audience. "Do you? Do you really enjoy watching someone's family get mocked based on lies?" The studio fell silent. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "I've spent years building a relationship with my kids based on trust," Brad continued, his voice steady, but intense. "They know they can count on me, and I won't sit here while you try to destroy that for ratings." Jimmy's face had lost its smile completely now. "Listen, Brad, you're overreacting. It's just a silly segment." "It's my family," Brad interrupted. "There's nothing silly about that." The show's producer had rushed onto the stage now, whispering urgently in Jimmy's ear. Jimmy nodded, then turned back to Brad. Okay, he said, raising his hands. "We'll move on. Let's talk about the movie instead." But Brad wasn't interested anymore. "You know what? I think I've said everything I need to say." He turned and started walking off the stage. "You can't just leave," Jimmy called after him. "We're live!" Brad stopped and turned around. The studio lights caught the fire in his eyes as he pointed a finger at Jimmy. "You crossed a line tonight," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent studio. "You want to make fun of me? Fine. My acting? My haircut? Have at it. But my kids? That's where I draw the line." Two security guards had appeared at the side of the stage now, unsure what to do. The producer was frantically signaling to cut to commercial. "Let me give you and everyone watching some advice," Brad continued, looking directly into the camera. "Be careful what lies you spread about people's families. Because one day, those lies might walk right up to you and demand answers." With that, Brad turned and walked toward the exit. Jimmy jumped up from his desk, his face now bright red with anger and embarrassment. "You can't walk out on my show." "Do you know who I am?" he shouted after Brad. Brad paused at the stage door and looked back. "Yeah," he said simply. "I do. That's the problem." As Brad pushed through the door, Jimmy called for security. "Don't let him leave. We need to finish the show." Two burly security guards started moving toward Brad, but the look in his eyes made them hesitate. The audience watched in stunned silence as the situation spiraled out of control. Nobody could believe what they were seeing on what was usually such a light-hearted talk show. And then things got even worse. One of the security guards grabbed Brad's arm. "Sir, you need to return to your seat," he said firmly. Brad yanked his arm free. "Don't touch me," he warned, his voice low but clear. The audience gasped. Someone in the front row started recording on their phone. Within seconds, dozens of phones were up, capturing every moment of the unfolding drama. Jimmy was still standing behind his desk, his face now a deep shade of red. "This is my show," he shouted. "And nobody walks out on my show." The producer was frantically waving his arms, trying to get the camera operators to cut away. But they kept filming, captivated by the real drama unfolding before them. "Your show?" Brad said, turning back to face Jimmy. "That's the problem right there. You think everything is about you. You think you can say whatever you want, hurt whoever you want, all for your precious ratings." Jimmy grabbed the fake trophy from his desk and held it up. "It's a joke, Brad. Can't you take a joke?" "My children aren't a joke," Brad replied, his voice steady despite his obvious anger. "And a real host would know the difference between humor and cruelty." The security guards looked at each other, unsure what to do. The producer had given up trying to control the situation and was now just watching in horror as his carefully planned show fell apart. Brad turned to the audience. "I want all of you to think about something. Would you want someone spreading lies about your family on national TV? Would you sit there and smile while someone called you a bad parent based on made-up stories?" Many audience members shook their heads. Some even called out, "No!" and "You tell him, Brad." Jimmy's face showed panic now. He was losing the audience. "Cut to commercial!" he shouted to the control room. "Cut to commercial now!" But the cameras kept rolling. "This was too good to miss," Brad continued, his voice growing stronger. "For years, I've watched celebrities get torn apart by shows like this. We're supposed to sit here and smile while hosts like you poke at our deepest wounds for laughs. It's part of being famous," Jimmy shot back. "You signed up for this." "I signed up to act in movies," Brad corrected him. "My kids didn't sign up for anything. They deserve privacy and respect." The audience burst into applause. Brad had touched a nerve. Jimmy looked around, realizing he was losing control of his own show. His fake smile returned as he tried a new approach. Okay, I hear you, he said, holding up his hands. Let's start over. Come sit down and we'll talk about your movie instead. Brad shook his head. It's too late for that. You showed everyone who you really are tonight. One of the security guards approached Brad again. Sir, please, make him. Sit down, Jimmy screamed, completely losing his composure now. The security guard reached for Brad's arm again, and this time Brad pushed his hand away. The second guard moved in quickly, grabbing Brad from behind. Get your hands off me, Brad shouted as he struggled to free himself. The audience was on their feet now, some cheering, others booing. The chaos was complete. From the side of the stage, a young woman rushed forward. It was Brad's assistant. Stop this right now, she yelled. This is assault. The security guards hesitated, knowing she was right. They loosened their grip on Brad. Jimmy was practically jumping up and down behind his desk. This is my show, my rules. Your show is over, Brad said calmly, straightening his jacket where the guards had grabbed him. At least for tonight. The producer finally managed to get on stage. He whispered something urgently to Jimmy, who shook his head violently at first, then seemed to deflate as the producer continued talking. Brad turned to leave again, and this time no one tried to stop him. The audience watched in stunned silence as he walked to the edge of the stage. But Jimmy wasn't done yet. You know what, Brad? He called out, his voice dripping with venom. Maybe those magazine stories are right. Maybe you are a terrible father. A real father would set a better example than storming off like a child. The audience gasped. Even the producer looked shocked. That was a line that should never have been crossed. Brad stopped in his tracks. For a moment everyone thought he might charge back and attack Jimmy. The security guards tensed, ready to intervene. Instead, Brad turned slowly. His face was calm now, almost sad. You know nothing about me, he said quietly. Nothing about my children. Nothing about what it means to be a father. Jimmy opened his mouth to reply, but Brad cut him off. I protect my children, he continued, from people like you, people who would use them, hurt them, all for a few minutes of entertainment. The studio was completely silent now. No one moved. No one even seemed to breathe. I feel sorry for you, Jimmy, Brad said. Because when the cameras are off and the audience is gone, you have to live with yourself. And that must be incredibly hard. With that, Brad turned and walked off the stage. This time, no one tried to stop him. The producer looked at Jimmy, whose face had gone from red to white. Go to commercial, the producer said to the control room. Now! But before the show cut away, everyone saw Jimmy sink into his chair, the fake trophy still clutched in his hand, his face a mask of shock and humiliation. As Brad walked through the backstage area, crew members stepped aside, some nodding in respect, others averting their eyes in embarrassment. His assistant hurried after him. That's going to be everywhere by morning, she said, already checking her phone. Social media is blowing up. Brad didn't slow down. I don't care, he said. Some things matter more than publicity. Outside the studio, a small crowd of fans had gathered, having heard through social media that something was happening on the show. When Brad emerged from the building, they cheered. You stood up for yourself, Brad, someone shouted. We're with you, called another. Brad waved briefly but kept walking toward his waiting car. As he reached for the door handle, he heard a commotion behind him. He turned to see security guards escorting someone else out of the building. It was Jimmy Colbert himself, his face red with anger, his tie loose around his neck. You think you can make a fool of me on my own show? Jimmy shouted, pointing a finger at Brad. The security guards tried to hold him back, but Jimmy shook them off. Do you know how many careers I've made? How many I've broken? Brad stood calmly by his car door. The small crowd of fans went silent, phones recording every second of this unexpected second act. "This isn't about careers, Jimmy," Brad replied. "This is about basic respect." Jimmy laughed bitterly. "Respect? You want to talk about respect after walking out on my show? The ratings are going to tank because of you." One of the security guards tried to grab Jimmy's arm. "Sir, please, let's go back inside." Jimmy yanked his arm free. "Get off me! I'm not done!" Brad's driver had gotten out of the car now, concerned by the escalating situation. "Mr. Pitt, we should leave," he said quietly. But Brad shook his head. "It's okay," he said, then turned back to Jimmy. "Say what you need to say." Jimmy stepped closer, his breath visible in the cool night air. "You celebrities are all the same. You want all the fame, all the money, all the adoration. But the second someone asks a tough question, you can't handle it." "Is that what you think happened in there?" Brad asked. "You think you asked a tough question?" "I was doing my job," Jimmy insisted. "Your job is to humiliate people, to spread lies about their families." Brad's voice remained calm, but there was steel behind his words. "I don't think that's what your viewers tune in for." Some of the fans murmured in agreement. A few even called out, "He's right, Jimmy." Jimmy looked around, suddenly aware of the growing crowd and the many cameras pointed at him. His producer had followed him outside and was now whispering urgently in his ear. "The network's on the phone," the producer said. "This has gone too far." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Jimmy's face. He looked back at Brad, who was watching him with something close to pity. "You know what the sad part is, Jimmy?" Brad said quietly. "You're talented. You don't need to stoop to this level to get ratings." Jimmy stared at him, his anger momentarily replaced by surprise. "You used to ask thoughtful questions," Brad continued. "You used to really talk to your guests, not just set them up for cheap shots. What happened to that guy?" The producer was still whispering urgently to Jimmy, showing him something on his phone. Jimmy's face went pale as he looked at the screen. "It's already trending," the producer said, loud enough for Brad to hear. "Boycott. Jimmy Colbert is the #1 hashtag right now." Jimmy swallowed hard, his bravado visibly deflating. He looked around at the crowd, at the security guards, at his producer, and finally back at Brad. Jimmy started, then stopped. For once, the famous talk show host seemed at a loss for words. Brad opened his car door. "It's not too late to be better, Jimmy," he said simply. Then he slid into the back seat and closed the door. As Brad's car pulled away, he could see Jimmy standing there in the headlights, looking smaller somehow, the reality of what had just happened finally sinking in. Brad's phone buzzed with a text. It was from his oldest daughter. "Dad, you're all over social media. Everyone's saying you stood up to Jimmy Colbert." Before Brad could respond, another text came in. "I'm so proud of you." Brad smiled and typed back, "On my way home. Love you." The next morning, video clips of both confrontations, the one on stage and the one outside the studio, had gone viral. Brad Stood Up was trending worldwide, with parents especially praising him for defending his family. Jimmy's show was scheduled to tape another episode that afternoon, but 2 hours before filming, the network released a statement. "Tonight's episode of Tonight with Jimmy Colbert has been canceled. We will air a rerun in its place," Brad's publicist called early, her voice excited. "Brad, this is the best publicity we could have hoped for. Every talk show wants you now. Good Morning America, Today Show, Ellen, they're all calling. I'm not interested," Brad replied, watching his coffee brew. "I didn't do this for publicity." "But no interviews," Brad said firmly. "This isn't a press tour. This was about my family." Later that day, as Brad was helping his youngest with homework, his phone rang again. It was a number he didn't recognize. "Hello? Brad, it's Jimmy Colbert." Brad was silent for a moment, surprised. "Jimmy, Jimmy's voice sounded different. humbled. I wanted to apologize. Properly. Not for the cameras or the network, but to you personally. Brad walked into another room away from his children. I'm listening. What you said last night. About how I used to be. You were right. Jimmy's voice caught slightly. Somewhere along the way, I stopped caring about real conversations and started just going for cheap laughs. It happens, Brad said. This business can change people. The network's putting me on a 2-week suspension, Jimmy admitted. I deserve worse, honestly. What will you do? There was a pause on the other end of the line. I'm going to use the time to think. About the kind of host I want to be. The kind of person I want to be. Brad nodded, even though Jimmy couldn't see him. That sounds like a good start. I don't expect you to forgive me, Jimmy continued. But I wanted you to know that what you said, about it not being too late to be better, that stuck with me. I meant it, Brad said. After hanging up, Brad rejoined his kids at the kitchen table. His oldest looked up from her phone. Dad, you're not going to believe this. Jimmy Colbert just posted a public apology. A real one, not one of those fake, sorry if you were offended things, Brad smiled. People can surprise you sometimes. 2 weeks later, Tonight with Jimmy Colbert returned to the air. The opening was different. No loud music, no running onto the stage. Instead, Jimmy simply walked out and sat at his desk. "Welcome back," he said to the camera. "Before we get started tonight, I want to talk about what happened 2 weeks ago. On this show." The audience was silent, waiting. "I made a mistake," Jimmy said. "Actually, that's not strong enough. I was wrong. I tried to humiliate a guest for ratings, and in doing so, I hurt not just him, but his family." Jimmy paused, taking a deep breath. "This show is going to be different from now on. We're still going to have fun, but not at anyone's expense. We're going to have real conversations with our guests, not ambush them for cheap laughs." In his living room, Brad watched the broadcast with a small smile. His phone buzzed with a text from his publicist. "Jimmy's people called. They want you to come. Back on the show. Your terms." Brad thought for a moment, then typed his reply. "Tell them I'll think about it." As Jimmy's show continued, Brad turned off the TV and joined his kids for dinner. Tonight wasn't about talk shows or Hollywood drama or viral videos. Tonight was just about family. And that, Brad knew, was always worth fighting for.